Welcome to Anews. I'm Umar Taslim, and you're watching Turkey's Diplomacy. On today's episode, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar and political analyst Javed Rana will join me to discuss the latest developments impacting Turkey and the rising tensions between India and Pakistan. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
A moment of panic erupted at Israel's main international airport on Sunday as a missile strike landed nearby. Travelers were instructed to take cover in secured spaces in Ben Gurion Airport, with air raid sirens sounding in the background. Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis claimed responsibility for the strike. It blasted open a crater in the ground near a Terminal 3 parking lot, authorities said, but did no significant damage. In a statement after the attack, a Houthi military spokesperson warned airlines against using the Israeli airport, saying it was, quote, no longer safe. The head of Ben Gurion Airport said operations were up and running again after less than 30 minutes of disruption, though European and US carriers have scrapped flights for the next several days, leaving some passengers stranded.
I'm supposed to go back to Paris today, and Air France canceled their flight. And I'm afraid it's going to be very difficult today to go back to France because all European carriers, from what I see on the information, have cancelled.
Responding to the attack, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said, quote, whoever harms us will be harmed sevenfold. Israel resumed its war in Gaza in March following a 2-month truce. That's drawn a pledge from the Houthis to hit Israel with more missiles, saying it's an act of solidarity with Palestinians under siege.
As far as the trade routes, obviously we're being challenged. The whole world is being challenged by the Houthis, including in the dastardly attack they did today near Ben Gurion Airport. We will not tolerate it. We will take very strong action against them. And we always remember that they act with their patron Iran's direction and support.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar, a very warm welcome to you as well.
Good morning, Omar.
Mustafa, let's talk about the latest developments from Israel. Now, the Israeli government has started calling up reservists to fight in what they say as the next phase of the genocide in Gaza. So tell me about the latest developments and also tell me about the Houthi attack that we just saw in the news report.
Omar, according to latest news stories coming from the Israeli media channels, Israel right now is expanding its military operations in the occupied Gaza Strip. I think it means that the humanitarian situation will deteriorate in the region because Israel decided to expand its military operations in the occupied Palestinian territory. As you know, since October 7th, 2023, Israeli security forces have been murdering more than 50,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, living in the Gaza Strip. And I think Israel's latest decision will affect the region in terms of geopolitics, because all regional stakeholders right now are trying to increase pressure on Israel to put an end to the Israeli warfare in the region. I think Israel will be supposed to take regional stakeholders' concerns into the consideration, because geopolitical situation right now in the Middle East is escalating. Geopolitical tensions are escalating. As you know, Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen are still continuing to target Israeli infrastructure, and Israel's warmonger Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday pledged retaliation against Houthi attacks into the Israeli territory. And Israel is also, pressuring on the United States to increase its pressure campaign against Iran, because Israel is accusing Iran of supporting Houthi rebels in Yemen. I think that any further geopolitical tensions between regional or international stakeholders will pave the way for new confrontations in the Middle East. I hope all regional and international stakeholders will find a common way and common sense to de-escalate the geopolitical situation in the Middle East, because otherwise we will see, I'm afraid of that, new confrontations among regional stakeholders.
Musa, tell me about Iran. What is Iran? What has been Iran's response with these attacks? And also, President Donald Trump is going to visit the Middle East in the next few weeks. So how is Trump monitoring these attacks, and what could Trump say when he visits the Middle East, for example, when he goes to Saudi Arabia? How can he talk about Iran, the Houthis, and Israel with the Saudis?
Well, as you know, Iran is right now one of the most important supporters of Yemen, Houthi groups in Yemen, because, as you know, Iran lost its so-called axis of resistance in the Middle East in the last year. Israel's military campaign against Hezbollah group in Lebanon gave huge threat to Yemen, Hezbollah's group in Lebanon. On the other hand, as you know, Assad regime fought in Syria. Iran also lost its one of most important allies in Syria. Right now, Houthi groups are the only groups, including Iran's axis of resistance in the region. On the other hand, as you say, U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to visit the Middle East next week. He will pay an official visit to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. As you know, since he took the office at the White House in January, Trump has been increasing its military threats against Iran. He is always pursuing a maximum pressure campaign against Iran. As you know, there are some negotiations between the American and Iranian decision makers over Iran's nuclear ambitions. And right now, yes, Trump is seeking to pursue diplomacy and dialogue with the Iranian sides, but on the other hand, the Trump administration is always threatening to drop bombs on Iranian nuclear facilities. On the other hand, as we know, Israel is also pressuring the United States to increase its military campaign against Iran. And yesterday, Iranian decision makers also pledged to retaliate against any Israeli or American attacks into their country. I think all regional stakeholders should listen to Turkey's demands in the region, because Turkey is always calling for de-escalation between the regional and international stakeholders. Turkey is always prioritizing diplomacy and dialogue to resolve bilateral or multilateral disputes in the Middle East. I hope with the steps taken by Turkey and Turkish decision makers, geopolitical tensions will be de-escalated in the region.
Mustafa, let's talk about China. Since President Trump will be in Saudi Arabia, the Saudis have a very good relationship with the Chinese. And China is a country which has been advocating for less tariffs and more actions and fair trade deals. Now, Trump has also said that, with China, he wants to get a fair trade deal. So how can that impact? Could Trump's visit impact these trade tariffs, and how will President Donald Trump try to navigate his tensions with China?
Well, right now, I think we can clearly say that there is a trade war between the United States and China. As you know, both giant superpowers are competing with each other on the international stage. And right now, United States desperately needs new allies all over the world to encounter China's rise in the Asia-Pacific region. Within this context, as you know, Trump initiated large scale of tariffs against China, and he initiated trade wars with China. Right now, the United States is seeking for another allies to balance the China's power on the international stage. On the other hand, China is always looking for new cooperations with new allies in the Middle East. China, as you know, is one of the most important buyers of Iranian oil. China has been also enjoying close ties with other regional stakeholders in the Middle East. I mean, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I think that Trump will call on all these countries during his trip to Middle East to reconsider their rising relationships with China, because right now Trump has pledged to encounter China's rise in the Asia-Pacific region. I think if United States wants to encounter rising China in the Asia-Pacific, they need to gain new allies from other parts of the world. As we know that Trump will visit Middle East next week. Maybe he will also pay an official visit to Turkey next week following his Middle East tour. Right now there are some discussions between the Turkish and American decision makers. I hope diplomacy and dialogue will prevail over the geopolitical trade tensions among regional and international stakeholders.
Mustafa, another country that President Trump has been heavily involved with, or should I say countries, are Russia and Ukraine. And he's been closely following the war in Ukraine. During his presidential campaign, he said we could end the war in 24 hours. Over 100 days have passed and nothing has happened. Nothing credible has happened. Some deals have been agreed upon, for example, the minerals deal. And, you know, there are some other agreements, for example, the one that we saw a few weeks ago in the Black Sea. So now, yesterday, President Zelensky was in the Czech Republic, and he said that Europe needs to put more pressure on Russia. Do you think that the European Union, in such a fragmented state, can put additional pressure on Russia at this point?
Well, as you know, U.S. President Donald Trump has been seeking peace and dialogue between Ukraine and Russia to put an end to the ongoing conflicts in the Eastern Europe. But on the other hand, as you know, United States is eager to exclude Ukraine from the negotiating table. As you know, United States held separate talks with both Ukrainian and Russian decision makers, but Trump has been expressing its concerns and frustration over U.S.-Russian President Vladimir Putin's approach to any ceasefire deal with Ukraine. And right now, American decision makers are accusing their Ukrainian and Russian counterparts of obstructing the peace deal in the region. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is seeking security guarantees from its Western allies within the European Union. But on the other hand, Trump's approach to Ukraine-Russia war is also sparking fears among the European countries over U.S. commitment to Europe's security. Right now, many European leaders are reaffirming their strong support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and political sovereignty. But I don't think that Ukraine can continue its war, its ambitions against Ukraine without support coming from the United States, because I can clearly say that United States support for Ukraine in terms of military it can be seen as a vital to ensure peace and stability in Ukraine. If United States withdraws its support from for Ukraine, I don't think that Ukraine will be continuing its military operations against Russia.
Well, so now there's also a question about sanctions. Zelensky has said that the United States and European powers must put more sanctions on Russia. Now, a few weeks ago, in fact, when President Trump came into power, he said that there were talks with Russia. Talks were ongoing, and they were discussing Russia's frozen assets. Now, on one hand, you have those assets, and then you have these sanctions. Do you believe that the Trump administration is going to put more sanctions on Russia at a time when it's talking about releasing those assets as well?
Omar, as you know, as Russia started its special military operations in the Ukrainian territory, Western countries, particularly the United States, started to impose sanctions on Russia. And right now, during the negotiation process between Ukraine and between Russia and the United States, sanctions are the most complex issues to deal with, because Russia is always calling for lifting of sanctions imposed by the Western countries. On the other hand, Ukraine is pressuring on its Western allies to increase pressure on Russia to convince President Vladimir Putin to halt its military offensive in Ukraine. And I can clearly say that sanction issue is one of the most complex issues between regional and international stakeholders right now. Yes, sometimes Trump administration officials are also calling for lifting of sanctions against Russia. But on the other hand, Ukraine, I think, will continue to keep pressure on the United States and American decision makers to increase pressure on Russia if they want to reach a ceasefire deal in the Eastern Europe. But in the near future, I don't think that Russia and the United States will be able to totally normalize their bilateral relationships. And sanctions issue, I think, will be on the agenda for a while.
We're now going to take a look at this report on the war in Ukraine, and we'll be right back.
Russia has the strength and resources to finish its operation in Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin said in remarks published on Sunday, coming as Russian drones struck homes in Kyiv overnight, according to Ukrainian officials. They said children were among those injured. And released videos said to show the central city of Cherkasy, saying it was also attacked. Moscow has denied targeting civilians after it began a full-scale invasion of Ukraine more than 3 years ago. In a state TV documentary aired on Sunday about the Russian president, Putin was asked about the risk of nuclear escalation. They wanted to provoke us so that we made mistakes, Putin said. There has been no need to use those weapons, he added, and I hope they will not be required. The president also said his country has, quote, enough strength and means to bring what was started in 2022 to a logical conclusion with the outcome Russia requires. The carefully choreographed film was released as the Kremlin announced that China's President Xi Jinping will make an official visit to Russia next week. He'll be taking part in the 80th anniversary celebrations marking the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. Russian armed forces were seen holding rehearsals on Saturday ahead of a massive military parade set for May the 9th. Putin has proposed a 3-day ceasefire with Ukraine around the anniversary. In a social media post on Sunday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called it top-level cynicism, saying, quote, the Russians are calling for a ceasefire while striking Ukraine every single day, with thousands of drone and bomb attacks launched this week alone. Zelensky, who was in Prague on Sunday to meet his Czech counterpart, has said he is ready for a truce if it would last at least a month. But Putin has ruled that out in the near term, saying he wants a long-term settlement, not a brief pause.
Welcome back to the program. Now we're going to discuss the front page of Daily Sabah. Mustafa, some very interesting headlines today on Daily Sabah. The first one I want to talk to you about is the Turkish-Cyprus unity. That's the most important topic that I believe is on Daily Sabah's headline. What's the latest that we know about this headline, Mustafa?
Well, as you know, last week the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus hosted Turkey's premier technology event, Technofest, and dozens of representatives from Turkey, Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan participated in the Technofest event held by the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus presidency, and it is clearly showing the rising unity among Turkic states. As you know, Turkey is always calling for more cooperation among Turkic states to strengthen their bilateral or multilateral ties. Within this context, President Erdogan also attended the Technofest event in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. He praised the strengthening of cooperation among Turkic nations. He also inaugurated a presidential complex in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and it is clearly showing the rising cooperation between Turkey and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus in the international stage, because, as you know, except Turkey right now, no one is recognizing the political independence of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. On the other hand, Turkey is always calling for two-state solution to reach long-standing peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. I think this event is showing all the world that Turkic Union is behind the legitimate political rights of Turkish Cypriot people living on the Cyprus island. I think these type of events will further increase cooperation and collaboration among Turkic states, and it will help to increase international awareness about the legitimate rights of Turkish Cypriot people and political independence of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus.
Mustafa, also let's talk about Siri Suraya on there, who was the deputy parliamentary speaker and Dem lawmaker who passed away over the weekend. He had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. He was in coma for over 2 weeks, and on the weekend he sadly passed away. He was, well, one of the leaders of the Terror-Free Türkiye program that was launched, the initiative, I should say, launched by Devlet Bahçeli. So he passed away over the weekend, and another interesting headline over there. Musa, I also want to touch about AFAD volunteer applications rise fourfold after Istanbul earthquakes. Now, this headline is informing us that, people are volunteering for AFAD now, because we saw in the last few weeks, we've been having aftershocks, and there was a 6.2 earthquake as well in Istanbul. So people are definitely worried. Now, let's turn our attention to the opinion piece here by Valeria Gianotta. It's about Turkey and Italy ties. She's talking about how this could be a powerful partnership in Europe. Now, we saw last week Turkish President Erdogan was in Italy for an official visit. But so another headline that I saw was this one. The Fed is likely to keep rates on hold again. Wait for clarity on tariffs. What do we know about this?
Omar, right now there are some pressure against the Federal Reserve and its chairman, Jerome Powell, to not to increase the interest rates. But on the other hand, Jerome Powell is always citing pressures and economic uncertainties in the United States. As you know, Trump imposed a large scale of tariffs against dozens of countries in the world. He also paused his tariff policies for 90 days. And it is creating economic uncertainty within the United States and in the international arena. Within this context, this week, Federal Reserve, I think, it is projected to keep interest rates steady, because Jerome Powell is saying that we are supposed to decrease the inflation in the United States, but Trump's policies, according to news coming from the United States, is putting pressure on the inflation process in the United States. Yes, Trump is always claiming that we will see the benefits of tariffs in the long term, but in the short term, maybe we can witness economic shortages. But on the other hand, Fed is always warning Trump against escalating trade tensions with China. I think Fed will keep its interest rates steady this week.
So also the last two headlines that I want to touch upon. There is one about Ukraine and Russia. Hope there's no need to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. That's what President Putin has said. He says that, let's hope that we can find a solution. Let's find a ceasefire. Let's find a deal that would end the war in Ukraine. And again, the last one that I want to touch upon is Gazan mothers out of choices as Israeli aid bloc worsens hunger. Now, this is a daily story. It's over 52,000 people have been killed. There's nowhere to go. There are no hospitals. There are no homes. Like we discussed earlier, Israel has said that it's going to activate its reservists and then launch another phase of this genocide in Gaza. So that's another story. And, Houthi missile strike disrupts operation at Israel's main airport. We discussed that as well. Now, let's see what action regional countries will take We're now going to take a look at the rising tensions between India and Pakistan, and when we come back, we'll have Javed Rana with us.
The increasing tension between Pakistan and India was starkly visible Saturday evening at the mainland-Wagah border, where border guards from both sides lowered their flags just before sunset. This has been a daily practice for decades. As the sun dips toward the horizon every day, uniformed men of the Pakistan Rangers and India's Border Security Force march with dramatic precision. Their signature high kicks stretch impossibly skyward, their boots momentarily hovering near their faces. Sitting among hundreds of jubilant spectators were youths, women, and children who regularly come to cheer up their soldiers.
A proud Pakistani who is peaceful. We as a nation think very positively and peacefully. I think we should resolve all the conflicts. Love is bigger than any of the conflict in this world. And if anything is going to attack, we are going to revert stronger. We are a braver and a stronger and a peaceful nation.
One attendee, Akasa Hafiz, said she is a proud Pakistani, and Pakistan is a peace-loving country. But, she said, if India attacked Pakistan, the country's armed forces would strongly respond.
Welcome back to the program. Political analyst Javed Rana is joining us now from Islamabad. Javed Rana, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Javed, firstly, I want to ask you about the statement that has been released by Pakistani generals, Pakistani politicians. They're saying that they will give a befitting reply to the aggressors.
So let me interpret it. I think it means that the response from Pakistan is not going to be proportionate. It would be disproportionate. By disproportionate, it means that if India conducts one missile attack on Pakistan, the response could possibly be 2 or 3 missile attacks inside India. I think that has been some kind of informal discussions which have already taken place. And then you may recall the reason is at the heart of this entire calibration on the geostrategic landscape is that which country will have a strategic edge in the event of any brief conflict. Now, we have to see 2019 what had happened. India had carried out an airstrike inside Pakistan which had killed nobody other than the birds, but nonetheless, that was a breach of Pakistan's sovereignty. Pakistan took around 24 hours and they hit back India. 2 of its planes, which were in the air, they were shot down. One of the pilots was captured. And Pakistan was short of basically killing some senior generals inside the disputed Kashmir region, but it opted deliberately not to kill them. And it was a proportionate response which was designed not to escalate the conflict. This time around, the situation seems altogether different. Last time we had a democratic government under Prime Minister Imran Khan, and he was cautious that there should not be escalation. Now, I think learning from 2019, Pakistan considered that India is not listening to their strategic edge. India wants to somehow or the other have an edge in some kind of strategic edge where it can attack Pakistan, it can create an impression, some optics that India will hit back whenever there is any attack inside disputed Kashmir region. India, on whether or not India has an evidence or not, but since if there is any attack, India would hit back. That is the kind of the perception that India wants to create. Now, an option with Pakistan is left now that it is going to hit back in a disproportionate manner so that to teach lesson to India not to attack on Pakistan on an evidence which does not exist, based on some kind of a media campaign against Pakistan. I think these are the calculations which are being made. We have not seen any response, any military response from India so far. India, there are some reports suggesting that India did try to make some incursions, but its so-called latest Rafale fighter jets they had to retreat, and there are reports suggesting that the Pakistan had jammed the signals of their fighter jets. So given the fact that Pakistan is obviously behind the scene, backed by the China has a latest technology, and China is helping out Pakistan. So I think it is with every passage of day, it is becoming very difficult for India to attack Pakistan, but nonetheless, there is a possibility they can possibly go for it. And I think when it comes to the limited conflict, now there are calculations by many experts, and they're pointing out that Pakistan can win a limited conflict. And in the event of a long war, I think that is where the bigger question is, in which way this war would go, given the fact that Pakistan could possibly use its tactical nuclear weapons in the event that India makes certain incursions, and Pakistan thinks that it has left with no option but to use nuclear weapons. So I think it is a dangerous brinkmanship that is occurring in South Asia.
Mustafa, like Javed just said, that, Pakistan could engage in a war, India could target Pakistan. These are things that are developing, but what is the view that Turkey possesses at this point? What is Turkey saying? How is Turkey viewing these developments in India and Pakistan?
Well, as you know, in April, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif in the capital of Ankara. They discussed all aspects of bilateral relations between Turkey and Pakistan, and also they exchanged views on the latest geopolitical developments in the region. On the other hand, Turkey is clearly supporting Pakistan's position over the Kashmir issue. But Turkey is also enjoying close relationships with India. And given the fact that bilateral relationships between those countries, Turkey is always calling for dialogue and diplomacy between India and Pakistan to resolve their bilateral disputes over the Kashmir issue. Turkey is always prioritizing diplomacy and dialogue to reach a deal between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. But I think Turkey's strong support for Pakistan will continue in the coming future, because there are no historical problems between Turkish and Pakistani people. Turkey's ironclad support for Pakistan, I think, will bring long-lasting peace and stability to the region. But on the other hand, both Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons, and there is a nuclear deterrence theory in the international relations field. I think right now nuclear weapons are deteriorating both India and Pakistan to launch large-scale military attacks against the other one. I hope both the Pakistani and Indian decision makers will take Turkey's demands into consideration in the region, because Turkey is always calling for regional solutions for regional problems. I think Turkey will have both nuclear arch rivals in the region resolve their bilateral disputes. I think maybe Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan will engage high-level security talks with both his Indian and Pakistani counterpart in terms of de-escalating the geopolitical situation in the region.
Javed, I have two questions to ask you here. Like Mustafa said, that Turkey could be involved in mediating, and it has started holding talks as well in some shape and form. But now the Iranian foreign minister is in Pakistan today. Abbas Araghchi just arrived earlier today. Tell me about his visit. And secondly, the Russian foreign minister, Lavrov, he has held a phone call with Pakistan's foreign minister, Ishaq Dar. Tell me about those two developments.
I think a lot of countries want some kind of mediation. They want arbitration. But that is something which India would never accept. India would say that, if there is more pressure on India, India would say that we are going to hold negotiations bilaterally. And when there will be bilateral negotiations, India would say that Pakistan needs to stop terrorism. And that would be at the core part of the negotiations. And that means there would be no negotiation. Because when India talks about terrorism, then it doesn't present a very cogent evidence which is required. It doesn't present a plausible evidence. It comes up with the kind of intelligence intelligence reports, which does not make sense. I think those talks would not go anywhere. So all these kind of friendly posturing from Turkey, from Russia, and from Iran and other countries, I think these are not going to work. These would stay a non-starter. This has been a typical pattern of India, that it would not get into any negotiations. It has already undertaken a zero-sum game by revoking a shared water treaty, which could not have been revoked. It is irrevocable under the international law, and in a similar fashion, it has degraded the diplomatic relations, blocked whatever the little trade that was there between two countries. So I think the kind of jingoistic campaign that Indian media has launched, that has reached to a tipping point, and now it is a backfiring. People inside India, they are asking their government that what was the point of launching a jingoistic campaign when you were not supposed to attack on Pakistan. The Indian services chief, their air chief, their ground troops chief, they're all telling, as a matter of fact, to their government that if they launch an attack on Pakistan, there would be consequences. Now, India so far has not been able to calibrate. They have not been able to get the kind of the international support that is required to carry out an attack on Pakistan. Other than J.D. Vance, he said that if there is a limited, I hope the limited conflict does not get into a war, into a bigger conflict. So that was an indication that he also fears. Apart from that statement, if you look at Donald Trump, and he used the word that both countries have been fighting from 1,000 to 1,500 years. He doesn't know the history of the South Asia, that the Pakistan came into being just 70 years ago. So again, but that shows that he is basically ignoring. Now India has to present some kind of evidence. I think that is the reason that now Pakistan has gone into United Nations Security Council, and it has called for a meeting. And Pakistan, my understanding is broadly want to discuss two things. It is going to highlight that India has been citing so-called the historical pattern of enmity between two countries in a similar situation in the past, in 2019. And on the basis of the past history, it has been blaming Pakistan for masterminding an attack inside the disputed Kashmir region, which had killed 26 tourists. Now, I think in that context, Pakistan wants international community to ask India what plausible evidence does it has. Pakistan is basically trying to call off the Indian bluff. Now, that is one part, but I think the bigger issue here is the Indus Water Treaty. That was brokered by the World Bank in 1960. This treaty survived at least 3 to 4 wars between two countries. Now, as compared to those full-scale wars, this attack is a far small, in terms of comparison. But given the fact that there is the RSS government, which is now perceived to be a fanatical government, wants to annex most countries in the region, including Pakistan, I think they have launched a jingoistic campaign. They have a very strong desire to occupy Pakistan. But given the fact that Pakistan has been flexing its muscles, and it has tested many long-range and medium-range missiles, giving a clear warning to India that if Pakistan comes under attack, there would be a disproportionate response. I think that is the reason that India so far has not been able to carry out attack against Pakistan. Nonetheless, this could be a straightaway a deception, because there is an extremist RSS government in New Delhi, and they can go mad. They can resort to any insanity, and they can launch an attack on Pakistan. But I can tell you this time around that the response of Pakistan is going to be different to what had happened in 2019. India should not forget about it. That is the calculations which are being made in Rawalpindi and Islamabad in Pakistan. So again, the bigger picture is that India, as a matter of fact, has already committed an aggression. That is by suspending this water treaty. Pakistan has already said that this is an act of war. But since this treaty is suspended, India has not built up a required infrastructure whereby it can block Pakistan's water. So as a matter of fact, this aggression practically has not been committed. I think the day India tries to build up some kind of a required buildings, walls to stop the water going into Pakistan, I think that is where Pakistan could retaliate, and that is where I think the war between two countries can start off. Now, India does not have any argument on the basis of which it can revoke a treaty which is irrevocable. If there have to be certain amendments, those have to be done with the consent of each other. Now, India was already
Javed, I believe we're running out of time, so we'll have to end the program here. Thank you for your analysis. Thank you for joining us from the Pakistani capital, Javed. Mustaq Wajakanar, thank you for being on the program as well.
You are welcome, Omar.
And that wraps up this edition of Turkey's Diplomacy. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with more insights.